In the deep twilight of the late Pleistocene, when Europe was a land sculpted by ice and wind, the Neanderthals lived out their final millennia in a world that was turning steadily against them. Long before the rise of cities, long before the first seeds of agriculture, their lives unfolded in a vast and unforgiving wilderness. They were not a failing people, far from it. For hundreds of thousands of years they had mastered this landscape, shaping stone with unmatched precision, hunting the largest animals on the continent, enduring cycles of glacial cold that would have shattered any other hominin lineage. They were specialists in a world that rewarded endurance, strength, and intimate knowledge of every ridge, cave, and herd path. But as the climate shifted with increasing violence, as the rhythms of the land fractured into unpredictability, their mastery became a burden, anchoring them to a way of life the changing world could no longer support. 5,000 years before their extinction, Europe was locked in a climatic seesaw. The ice sheets advanced and retreated in sudden surges, reshaping forests into grasslands and grasslands back into forests within the span of a human lifetime. For Neanderthals, whose survival depended on close familiarity with local ecosystems, this chaos created instability at every level of existence. The forests of oak and pine, once their reliable refuge, were thinning. Herds of mammoths and steppe bison, creatures they had followed for generations, shifted their migratory routes far to the east and north. Prey became unpredictable. The cycles of reproduction and movement no longer matched the ancient hunting knowledge passed from elders to youth. Small clans were forced to abandon long-held territories. Caves that had sheltered generations grew cold and empty as groups moved in search of viable hunting grounds. But Neanderthal populations were never large to begin with. Even at their peak, they were scattered in small, tightly bonded bands, rarely numbering more than a dozen or two. These groups were robust and skilled, but their isolation became a fatal weakness as the climate changed. Without extensive social networks, without the ability to draw on distant allies or exchange information and mates across large regions, each clan faced the shifting world alone. When a valley's game disappeared or a bitter winter starved a group, there were no nearby kin to merge with, no greater nation of Neanderthals to absorb the loss. The lineage eroded, not through dramatic catastrophe, but through countless small fractures, clans disappearing one by one into the quiet of snow-covered forests. Still they endured. Their technology had become increasingly sophisticated. They crafted finely retouched stone points, expertly hafted spears, and specialized tools for scraping hides, carving wood, and processing plant materials. They controlled fire with precision, building hearths that lit the interiors of caves with a steady glow that softened even the harshest winter night. Their children were cared for with tenderness, evident in the archaeological traces of healing injuries and the careful arrangement of sleeping areas. They were intelligent, adaptive, emotionally complex beings whose brains were, on average, larger than those of modern humans. But intelligence alone does not guarantee survival when the very fabric of one's ecosystem unravels. As centuries passed, the cold sharpened. Glacial winds scoured Europe, creating great steppes of frozen grass that stretched to the horizon. Reindeer and mammoth dominated these plains, but these animals roamed in wide arcs across Eurasia, following ancient migrations that no longer aligned with the shrinking Neanderthal territories. To hunt effectively on this new landscape required long-range planning and extended mobility, traits better suited to species with wider social networks. Neanderthals, shaped by evolution to thrive in dense forests and rugged hills, found themselves increasingly out of sync with the megafauna they depended on. With food scarcity came demographic collapse. The birth rate dropped. Infants who would once have grown into strong hunters succumbed to cold and hunger. Injured adults who might have recovered in earlier times now represented insurmountable burdens. Clans were forced to merge more often, forming larger groups than their social structure had evolved for. These temporary expansions created tension as leadership and traditions clashed. Some groups adapted, shifting their diets to include more root plants, small mammals, and scavenged meat from predator kills. But these sources rarely provided enough calories to sustain a population through the harsh winters. Isolation deepened as the centuries passed. In Western Europe, small pockets of Neanderthals survived along the Iberian coast, where the climate remained slightly more temperate and marine resources could supplement their diet. These coastal refugia became the last strongholds of their kind, places where groups hunted red deer in the forests and gathered shellfish and mollusks from tidal pools. In these small enclaves, the final pulse of Neanderthal culture persisted. The crafting of stone tools following traditions hundreds of thousands of years old, the passing of oral knowledge around firelit caves, the raising of children under the sound of crashing waves. But even here, the population never recovered. The genetic diversity of these communities was so low that their resilience was effectively gone. A harsh winter, a failed hunting season, or a disease could decimate a clan beyond recovery. The environment continued to transform around them. Forests withdrew, grasslands expanded, competitor predators, cave lions, hyenas, and wolves became more numerous, their territories swelling by the shifting climate. Neanderthals, once the dominant apex hunters of Europe, now faced increasing competition for dwindling prey. They were no longer the uncontested masters of the land, they had become one species among many fighting for the same resources. In the final 1,000 years of their existence, Neanderthals were reduced to a scattering of isolated groups along the Atlantic coast and in sheltered mountain valleys. Their toolkits showed signs of innovation under pressure: more efficient scrapers, smaller bladelets, and perhaps even the earliest hints of osseous tools. But such late adaptations could not counteract the unstoppable tide of ecological collapse. Their numbers dwindled to the point where entire regions lay empty of their presence. Valleys that once echoed with the sound of flint striking bone, where the rhythmic hacking of woodcutting fell silent. The last surviving Neanderthal communities, likely numbering only a few dozen individuals at most, lived in what is now southern Iberia. They inhabited sea caves, hunted red deer in sparse forests, and gathered shellfish and mollusks from tidal pools. Their world was one of dwindling resources but rich traditions, knowledge preserved against all odds, passed from the final generation to children who would never see adulthood. And then, in the span of a few centuries, they were gone. Not through conquest, not through sudden catastrophe, but through the slow erosion of ecological, climatic, and demographic pressures that no species could withstand forever. Their disappearance was quiet. Their last fires burned in the deep chambers of caves overlooking an ocean that continued to crash against the rocks long after the final Neanderthal footsteps faded. Yet their legacy endures, in the archaeological record carved into stone, in the caves that still hold their hearths, in the DNA scattered through modern humans from ancient interbreeding events long before their final decline. They were not a failure. They were a lineage that survived for hundreds of thousands of years in some of the harshest environments ever inhabited by humans. Their final 5,000 years were not a slow defeat, but a testament to resilience, a story of a people who endured until the land itself could no longer sustain them.
The Neanderthals did not vanish in fire or flood, nor in a single violent moment that history could remember. They faded as the land they understood slipped beyond recognition, as forests withdrew, herds vanished, and the rhythms that had guided their lives for hundreds of thousands of years quietly broke apart. One by one, their camps emptied, their paths went untrodden, and their fires burned for the last time beneath familiar stone. When the final footsteps disappeared into snow and dust, Europe did not mourn. Ice advanced, winds scoured the plains, and new ecosystems took shape above the traces of their world. Yet beneath the soil, In caves and valleys long abandoned, the record of their endurance remained. Tools, hearths, and bones preserving the memory of a people who survived longer than almost any human lineage. Their disappearance was not a failure, but the closing of an age, leaving behind a silent testament to resilience written into the land itself.